So, I guess we'll start with the roll call. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair. I will now call roll. Greg Heyman.
Present.
Emily Simnett.
Present.
Richard Devlin.
Present.
Sandy Rowe. Gail Yamasaki.
Present.
Excellent. And Mr. Chair, that is roll. We have a quorum. I will reach out to Chair Rowe to confirm she's able to hear us.
Oh, thank you so much, Guthrie. Some preliminary comments. We haven't met for a while. As you will be evident in our approval of the February meeting minutes, but we have, I think, an important meeting today, really focused on sort of a singular topic, and hopefully it will be important information. Also think it's an important conversation for us to have. I am mindful of the conversation that Chair Rowe and myself had with you as commissioners at our last full commission meeting about sort of something that we came away with from our visits, and sort of concerns and thoughts that we might have about our future directions for education. I think that the report and conversation today will build on that. So I thank you so much for your attention. It's a beautiful day out there, and you've chosen to be here. I'm grateful for that. And with that, we'll begin with an action item to approve the February F&A meeting minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner Devlin. The second.
Oh, I'll second. This is Gail.
Thank you. All in favor? Yeah?
Aye.
Aye. Just we'll raise hands.
Aye.
Thank you so much. And that voice that seconded that motion reminds me that we have a new member of the Finance and Achievement Committee. I'm grateful that Gail Yamasaki has agreed to be a part of this group, kind of broadening this deeper perspective on funding and achievement as it relates to the work of HECC. And so, Gail, I want to welcome you and invite you, and know that you will be fully engaged in the work that we have ahead for us. So thanks. That gives our group a little more heft to it, and I'm grateful for that, and grateful to all of you. Guthrie, do we have anyone who has signed up for public comment?
Mr. Chair, we do not at this time.
Okay. Then I guess we will move on to the item number 3.0, which is the Financial Sustainability Report from the public universities. And I believe Jim Pinkard has that item for us. Jim?
I certainly do. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Pleasure to be here with you today on what is, as the chair noted, a beautiful sunny summer day. I do want to spend a few minutes walking you through this report, which is presented for the public universities. We will, in August at the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee meeting, present a similar report for the community colleges. So more information there. I do have a slide deck I'm going to pull up here and share my screen, which is posted as part of your materials in 3.0A. Let me get this situated. Hopefully all of you can see the slide deck that I'll walk through. I do want to start off by saying that Chair Heyman is absolutely correct. This, I think, is really good information. It's dense information, and it's chock full of financial language, which I know for some can feel very much like a foreign language. So if there are questions at any time, let me know. I'm happy to take questions at any time during this presentation. And I want to highlight just a few of the key takeaways for you as we get later on in the section where we talk about broader trends. I do want to note from the get-go that the financial monitoring work we do as HECC staff is really intended to inform your work as commissioners in developing state goals, determining strategic investments, recommending a consolidated budget. So this is not an action item for you today, but this information is really presented and prepared, and we update this every year in hopes that this information will inform some of the other work that you're doing, degree requests that you have to consider for approval, all the work that you do. Hopefully this information will help inform your thinking on some of that work. So that's really the intent behind the financial sustainability report. I will tell you that we did rename the report. In previous years, we used to call this a financial condition report. So now we're calling it a financial sustainability report to clarify that our focus is not solely on what is their condition today, but are they also sustainable for the future? Because the future of their ability to meet their students where they are and to meet their mission where it needs to be is a key element of this conversation. So just a slight note there on the nomenclature. In terms of your subcommittee charge, the 4-item charge, this is where we get into monitoring the institution's financial conditions. We'll talk about general information, how we assess sustainability, and then we'll talk broader trends, and we'll focus on federal funding just because of what we're seeing lately. From the get-go, this is, again, a report that focuses on the 7 public universities. And so it's important just in terms of level setting to note that they are in statute public bodies legally separate from the state. Their governing boards have the ultimate authority over their institutional finances, and the governing boards are the ultimate fiduciaries over all their funding. They are tax exempt. They use an accrual basis for accounting. They report as business type activities, and they're eligible for state-backed bond funding. For those of you who tune into many of their quarterly board meetings, you'll note that they use fund accounting in the conversations with their own boards. And so that's a little bit different than how they report in their annual financial reports. When we look at last fiscal year, 2024, collectively, all 7 of them collected $4.3 billion in revenue and spent about $3.9 million. On the revenue side, the majority of their funding comes from students, from the state, and the federal government. About 2/3 of that funding comes from those 3 sources. They have auxiliary revenue, and in 18%, that other revenue source, that's where capital gifts and other donations are recorded. On the expenditure side, by far, the majority of their money is spent for instruction. When you add research and public service into the mix, that's almost 60%, with auxiliary spending on housing, athletics, food service, retail operations, 18%. Institution support, which is maintenance, utilities, capital, landscaping, security, that's 14%, and then there's a slight slice of 6% for other uses. If we look solely at their general fund or education and general fund, we see here in the middle in the pie chart that 63% of that funding comes from tuition and fees. And this is really where, from a policy perspective, we communicate to legislative members that the students are picking up the majority of the cost of their education. This pie chart in previous generations was reverse, where the state picked up the majority of the cost and the student picked up a minor share. So they're more reliant on tuition and fee revenue than they have been in the past, although tuition and fee discounting, which averages 15% of gross tuition right now, is up from 10 to 11% about 4 or 5 years ago. The tuition setting process is complicated and is very inclusive. The largest expense by natural classification, of course, is personnel, both wages and benefits, which is about 77% of total spend. And then some of the expenses that they experience are outside the control of the governing board. PERS rates are the perfect example of that. And so we get to the purpose statement. Why are we doing financial monitoring? We do it really for 3 reasons: to provide advance warning of potential financial instability for us to consider. We also seek to identify systematic risks to Oregon's higher education infrastructure with a focus on the education workforce mission. And then we also always want to maintain an awareness of broader trends that can affect our institutions and their sustainability going forward. So I'll point out that the general outlook for higher education, this comes from Moody's Investor Services. Moody's is one of the biggest credit rating agencies. They rate the bonds that universities and colleges sell, and they're national in perspective. But every fall, they release an outlook on higher education, or an industry outlook, as it were. And in their most recent industry outlook for education, they noted shifting federal policies and market volatility add substantial risk for those institutions already dealing with elevated expense growth and enrollment challenges. And so I think that right there is, in very simple terms, a perfect expression of the unprecedented level of volatility we're seeing at our institutions in terms of the unprecedented level of uncertainty. Much of that is evolving political risk due to federal government policy uncertainty, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later today, and I think you'll likely hear about that tomorrow morning with the full commission as well. I want to talk about, in the report, what approach do we use? The framework we use is really a simplified approach that we think has a higher likelihood of predicting instability, noting full well that there's no perfect method capable of forecasting financial distress, but we take a simplified approach that uses currently available data that uses 4 metrics noted in the middle of this slide to, again, get at what's the likelihood of instability going forward. The conditions are noted as stable, struggling 1, or struggling 2, which is a nomenclature that we borrowed from NACUBO, the National Association of Colleges and University Business Officers. So we really rely on industry experts to help inform the approach that we take. On the right-hand side, we offer a quick summary of these 4 metrics, right? So 3 of the universities have experienced declining enrollment over the past 2 years. All but 2 of the universities have experienced enrollment declines in the last decade. Many of our universities are struggling to balance expense growth with revenue growth from year to year. So balancing their budget from year to year is starting to become an issue. And for some of them, capacity is an issue. And by capacity, what I really mean is the capacity for mission relevance in the future. So maintaining and having the resources to develop new academic programs, to offer additional student support services as needed, to revise curricular approaches, to invest in meeting the mission where it needs to be in the future. That's really what we mean by capacity. And then state funding has been a consistent and helpful support for financial health in the past, but questionable going forward. When we talk about assessing financial sustainability, I first have to say that definitionally, financial sustainability is short-term and long-term in nature. And in the short term, we focus on the ability to carry out activities that will achieve the mission today, while also developing and maintaining their capacity for mission relevance tomorrow. So it's both perspectives. We use 4 financial ratios noted in the middle of this chart to assess, 2 for short-term, 2 for long-term. We add all together into one number, which we call the Composite Financial Index, which is a simplified way to assess the entire university. Keep in mind that the CFI score, the Composite Financial Index score, doesn't have absolute precision. So it's most useful if it's measured over time, but it attempts to quantify the overall financial well-being of the institution. You'll see on the left-hand side of this, the 4 ratios. When we weight them, we don't equally weight them. The 2 ratios that focus on long-term capacity and mission relevance, primary reserve ratio and viability, are 70% of the Composite Financial Index. The 2 short-term ratios that focus on short-term mission achievement are 30%. So we do this deliberately to ensure that we're appropriately weighting and focusing on the long-term mission of the institutions. The scale of the CFI, it's typically 0 to 10, although you can have a negative CFI, and the higher the better. Typically, industry standard is you want to be 3 or above in general terms. So in the report itself, on page 7, you'll see in table 1, we include all 3 of the metrics: enrollment, the Composite Financial Index, and the reliance on state funding. So if you're wondering how each of the 7 institutions, table 1 is offered as a report card of sorts to give you an idea currently where each of the 7 universities kind of stands vis-a-vis those 3 metrics. When we look at their education in general funds, though, we note that during the past 5 years, the annual growth in spending is slowly outpacing the growth in revenue. So this is creating a structural budget gap. Spending is growing at 4, 5, 6%. Revenue is growing at 2, 3, 4%. So there's a 1 to 2% structural gap between the two. Many of the universities are engaging in campus conversations with their partners about how to address those challenges and trying to come up with plans going forward on how to adjust that. We also note collectively the universities are more reliant on state funding than they have been in the past. We measure this as a percent of total revenue. So I want to place an asterisk next to this and tell you that less reliance on state funding is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, right? So there's caution there, because if their enrollment is growing and they're collecting more tuition dollars, then their reliance on state funding could decline. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the state funding for some of them in the last 4, 5, 6 years has really bolstered their financial position. And without the substantial growth in state funding over the last few years, I think many would be even more challenged to balance their budgets. The question, of course, going forward is, will the growth in state funding continue at the rate it has the last 5, 10 years? That's an open question, but something to be cognizant of. The third takeaway, when we look at their general funds by themselves, financial reserves have stabilized for many individually, although collectively there's a year-to-year trend that indicates a decline. That's likely due to the pandemic. In 2020, 2021, 2022, you may recall that there was significant investment by the federal government in what was called at the time the HERF, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. Our public and private institutions in the state received over $750 million through that fund. And so that funding was used during the pandemic to invest in student affordability, to invest in balancing their budgets. And for some, what it did in the short term is it increased their financial reserves. And now we're seeing a trend where their financial reserves are essentially reverting back to the historical norm. I'm going to pause there. I see a hand go up for questions.
That was an error. My apologies, Jim.
No problem, no problem.
I have a,
Gave me a
I have
chance
a-
to sip water. Go
I
ahead.
have a question, Jim. My won't let me raise my hand, so I'm not able to. So, um, I'm wondering if you explained how, I appreciate your explaining how expenses outpacing growth, and yet we have a relatively stable financial reserve system-wide. That seemed to be a contradiction, but you explained that to me now. Do you know if any of the institutions have a required reserve built into their institutional policy?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. I know that many, if not all of them, do. And let me say it this way. I know all of them have an adopted fund balance policy. I think some in the recent past is in the last 5 years, have reevaluated their fund reserve policy and made slight modifications or changes to it. Many of them, after OUS dissolved, just adopted the old Oregon University system policy, which I think required a 15% of expenses fund balance reserve. But some of them have changed that. And so what I often encourage them to do is to have that conversation with their board so that there's, and I encourage them to revisit that periodically, every 5 years or so, just so that there's a conversation ongoing about what those balances and what those reserves should look like given current conditions. So.
Thank you, Jim.
So I want to talk about broader trends. I note, of course, in the financial report, there's a lot more information. We have a 6-year trend for each one of the financial ratios, and we provide contextual information about what those ratios should look like, and we provide contextual information for the composite financial index. We also note on page 15 some of the other non-quantitative factors that can play a role in the finances of an institution: audit issues, known investigations or sanctions of which we are unaware of any, leadership turnover. So there are some other factors, qualitative factors that play a role, and they're noted on page 15 for your awareness. Page 16, we talk about the systematic financial trends. I really want to spend some time, though, on this notion of broader trends that can affect their finances going forward. That section of the report starts on page 17 and goes through page 21. I really encourage you to read that, digest it, because this is where I think going forward, as we look toward the future, these are some of the trends that we see may impact the institutions. Demographics are changing here in Oregon. Our population is getting older. It's not growing much, if at all. The traditional pipeline student, those students 18 to 24, that population of Oregonians is actually projected to decline slightly between now and 2035. And the long-term projections through the end of the century predict that population as a percentage of the total population will decline as well. So the key to one of the keys to the financial future for our institutions is going to be adult students, non-traditional adult learners. Can we attract them to higher education? Can we collaborate with them to complete credentials and degrees? That's an open question. So the demographic challenges are real. The number of high school students is dropping. The number of high school graduates is dropping in this state. And so in the next decade or so, that's going to continue to be an area of concern as it relates to the growth in operating revenue for our institutions. Strained budgets is another area of concern where, again, we see in the short term expenditure growth exceeding that of revenue growth. And so that structural gap is challenging for many. The magnitude of it is different campus by campus, but in general terms, balancing expenses with available revenue is going to create budgetary strain in the short term for the institutions. How they manage that with their boards providing leadership is going to be something that I think will occupy more of their time than it has in the past. Sustainability in terms of capacity building in the long term will be challenging. Again, if they can't balance their budgets in the short term, then they can't create the reserves that they need for capacity building for mission relevance in the long term. So if revenue doesn't keep pace with the growth in spending, that's going to necessitate challenging conversations at the campus level about how do we sustain our mission relevance, our ability to operate going forward. I was talking to a higher ed industry expert that I have a lot of respect for recently, and he expressed it in terms of a maturing industry. He said that higher education is becoming a mature industry where enrollment growth going forward just won't be at the pace that it was in the past. So it might very well be that higher education is at an inflection point where the next 10, 15, 20 years won't look like the last 10, 15, 20 years. If that's the case, our operating models, how we fund institutions of higher education, what we can expect from them, how they deliver the services students have come to count on, all those status quo types of issues might necessitate continued conversation and might look different going forward. And so that comment from this person resonated with me. This was NCHAMS. I was talking to NCHAMS. Anyway, I also note state funding. Recent increases in state funding are having a positive impact on affordability. The challenge is that long-term going forward, the transfer of cost burden from the state to the student hasn't really altered. We've seen slight improvement in affordability, but we have not seen a transformational alteration in that transfer of cost burden. And there's also the obvious question going forward of, can the state investment in higher education be sustained, right? So we've seen fairly significant growth in state investment in higher ed in the recent past, in the last decade. What does the next decade of state investment in higher ed look like? And so I'll let that question hang in the air.
Jim?
Yeah.
Oh, someone have a question?
Yes.
Commissioner Devlin, yes.
Jim, isn't everything in a sense relative? If you say that there has been an improvement in funding in the last decade, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's adequate funding or that it's a desirable level of funding. It simply means that the funding is improved from whatever level it was, correct?
Correct.
So, I mean, one of your other charts shows that I can't remember, I'll have to go back to the chart, that we're about 4,000 less per student FTE than the national average. So, I mean, I think everything in a sense is relative. This is going to be a relatively flat year. We believe that the current civil service level has been underestimated. Many of the add-ons from the previous biennium are not going to be part of the current service level. And the current service level obviously doesn't really reflect the increases in costs for the universities. Now, next year, if we get some improvement beyond current service level, it will be in effect from a level that we first of all felt was inadequate. So it might be an improvement, but it's not necessarily that we've moved significantly towards a direction of relying less on fees and tuition. I mean, it would take a substantial increase to rely less on fees and tuition. And it's more of a statement on
I think that's exactly right. And let me briefly share the factual data that kind of underpins what you're saying. On pages 20 and 21 of the report, we lay out information in the most recent version of the State Higher Education Finance Survey, which is a national survey published by SHEO. Oregon, for its public universities, ranks 46th in the nation in terms of educational appropriations per student. We trail the national average in funding per student by 43%. And we have trailed the national average anywhere from 20 to 40% in the last 40 years, according to that survey. So I think what you're saying is really well said. Funding growth doesn't necessarily mean adequate funding. And as an aside, in October, when we bring to this subcommittee a plan for the upcoming public university funding distribution model review process, the SSCM review, one of the themes of that that I see is a conversation around funding adequacy. What would adequate funding actually look like? So that's something we're going to bring back to you for your consideration in October as a tease of coming attractions. But I think your point is well said, and there is data in the report to tease out that.
Thanks, Kim. I see that Commissioner Yamasaki has a question. You are muted. Well, we'll keep working on that. Sorry. Jim, I have another question. I appreciate your reference to, I think it was a witchy person or something, referred to a higher education, a mature organization or industry or something like that. It just because it reminds me the work of Clayton Christensen, which talks so succinctly about sort of what kinds of decisions mature organizations need to make. And I think, so far you've documented, and certainly Chair Rowe and myself experience significant shifts in what we'd call the market, the students that we're serving, trends in terms of online, in terms of age, in terms of demographic, in terms of intentionality regarding full-time or part-time, significant changes. And again, Dr. Christensen would argue that that issue of sustainability requires a mature organization to reframe its work. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I don't have any grand conclusion about that. Just I do think it's a timely reference and a conversation, I hope, for the future in terms of if we are that organization, how do we reframe that work around shifting circumstances? So thank you.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I don't think I'm betraying any confidences by saying the conversation I had was with Dennis Jones of NCHAMS.
Yep.
And I just blanked on his name a second ago when I was sharing it. But for those of you who may or may not know Dennis Jones, he's been in higher education for a long time, 30, 40, 50 years. And he's with the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, and so NCHAMS. So Dennis and I were talking about that a few months ago.
Right.
It really
Good man.
with me. I was hoping to buy Commissioner Yamasaki a minute or two to see, and I see she's still struggling a little bit, but
Still muted.
But I will say that certainly in the meeting chat, maybe there's an opportunity to type a question. And also I'll be around tomorrow for the full commission meeting as well. I'll be appearing in my live human form tomorrow as well. So a call back to the pre-meeting conversation. So, Mr. Chair, should I continue with the slides then?
If you have any of you, if you have a question or a comment and you're unable to unmute, please, I'll watch the chat section as well and see if we can't try and get us all engaged in this conversation. So we'll struggle through this technical glitch. So yes, Jim, please continue.
Okay. I do have just a couple more slides. Really wanted to talk about federal funding just for a few minutes and for a few slides, because I know all of you are aware of the conversations at the federal level and about the shifting policy environment there. So how does federal funding affect our public universities? I think first and foremost, it's important to note the universities do receive a substantial amount of federal funding, but when we look at how that funding interacts with state funding, they're used often for different purposes. State funding is typically used as general operation support, as well as provides limited financial aid grants to students through the Oregon Opportunity Grant and other related programs. Some of the funding is also targeted for specific research projects, and it is used for certain public services like the state programs, the statewide public services, the outdoor school, and some other functions. Federal funding, meanwhile, is typically used predominantly for financial aid, both loans and grants to individual students, and it funds specific research and public service projects as well, different projects, but they're usually called out specifically. Some of them are competitive grant projects, some of them are competitive research projects, just kind of depends. The accounting for federal funding is complicated. I made an attempt to describe that on this slide. I don't want to get trapped into the details of that though. But I will say on the right-hand side of the chart, in the federal nomenclature, they all often refer to federal funding in subjects or clusters. And so the funding is awarded in different clusters. This slide shows you for the last fiscal year how much money. So the universities, for the seven public universities received or reported having spent more than $1.1 billion in federal funding. The vast majority of it, as you can see on the left side of this chart, was for financial aid. So 40% of the total was for student loans, direct student loans, mostly subsidized student loans, and then 11% was for grants, mostly Pell Grant revenue, and then $482 million or 41% was used for research, and then $96 million for other programs, mostly public service programs, TRIO, Head Start, economic development programs, and a whole bunch of other programs. When we look at that spending by university, we see almost half of it being spent by Oregon State University, a lot of it spent for research. So Oregon State University being the land grant, as you can imagine, they have interactions with the federal government, probably a dozen different federal government entities. They have federal grant sharing arrangements with dozens of different universities, as does University of Oregon. So when you look at how they spend this money, they collaborate with universities all over the nation, from coast to coast on research projects for various subjects. The TRUs by themselves represent about 9% of the federal spending in total. They have a much smaller research mission than the comprehensive universities do. Let me see. So I will tell you, and some of this might come up tomorrow as well, that there have been recent questions about what does this look like under the bills, the federal bills, the House Reconciliation Bill that's being considered at in the federal Congress right now. I understand, and some of this might come up tomorrow, but I understand that within the House Reconciliation Bill, there are changes to Pell funding being considered, and there are changes to financial aid funding being considered. One estimate that was provided by the American Council on Education on a state-by-state basis shows that the Pell eligibility changes that are being considered by Congress right now could result in an estimated loss of anywhere from $34 to about $48 million in Pell Grant funding for students in this state. That could affect anywhere from 37 to 44,000 Oregonians going to school. So a lot of those impacts are still being characterized and assessed, but that's the best information we can give you right now, at least for Pell Grants. For loans, as I understand it, based on, again, analysis that comes from the American Council of Education, the potential cut, I don't know how else to say it, for loans would be $200 to $222 million, give or take. So we're looking at fairly sizable cuts to both programs within the federal legislation measures. But again, I want to underscore the preliminary nature of that analysis and the fact that that analysis comes from the American Council on Education, and it's part of a developing set of data points that we have. So.
Thank you, Jim. I see that Chair Rowe has joined us and has a comment or a question. So, Chair Rowe.
Thank you. Just a comment, slightly hopeful. The Senate today X'd out the cuts to the Pell Grants. That doesn't mean somebody else won't put it back in or that it won't last, but as of today, at least, that is X'd out.
Great. That's good news.
Maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Jim, I appreciate, having had to pay way too much time on this my past life, I appreciate your noting that Pell Grants and loans are essentially discounts on tuition, which means if you lose it, at least from a budgetary perspective, you just get it in direct tuition. I think the concern is that in the absence of that financial support, we'll see a decline in enrollment. And so while it is an offset, it has certainly the significant chance of reducing the access that students have to education if we are to lose any significant portion of either loans or grants. So I just wanted to, I understand the accounting, but it can have a large potential impact on students themselves.
I appreciate you saying that, Mr. Chair, and I think it's important to underscore the importance of that exact point. I understand one of the other considerations, one of the other factors in terms of Pell eligibility is that's being considered is eliminating, potentially changing eligibility for part-time students. And that could be a really big issue for the state's community colleges because a much larger share of the students at the colleges are part-time students. And so, to Commissioner Hayman's point, if those students are no longer eligible going forward, that could change their decision process. They could decide, well, then I can no longer afford. And so, these are weighty issues. I'm trying as best I can to provide fact-based context and objective context for you. But with daily updates to what's being considered at the federal level, it's kind of hard to, honestly, it's really just hard to keep up, right? But but I'm really trying to offer what limited context I can. So, but I want to underscore that exact point.
Yeah.
And also want to just focus on these three key takeaways, right? So I know the financial information that we included in this report can be weighty, but I think this is where I would like to leave you and say that none of the universities are in an emergent financial crisis. I think it's really important to note that the public universities are coping as best they can. And the truth, though, is that they remain vulnerable to financial pressures that could challenge their sustainability going forward. And how they choose to react to that, I think, is important. I think the federal government undeniably is an important funding partner. Shifting federal policy creates an unprecedented level of uncertainty, which makes it more difficult to plan for the future. Given the challenges that faces public higher education, informed decisions are needed at the campus level to create a stable operating environment. And I think all of our universities are engaged in those conversations through their boards with their communities about what does this look like for us? What does this look like for our institution and for our mission and for our students? And how do we serve our students going forward with the challenges and pressures that we face? So I know they're all focused on that. I will, in closing, also point out that tomorrow on your agenda, agenda item 9.1, as presented by my colleague and friend, Dr. Veronica Dijon, she's going to present the public university evaluations for U of O, OSU, and PSU. In those evaluations, you'll see a section on financial health. And that section is consistent with the financial sustainability report that I'm presenting to you today, but those sections take it a bit of a step further by also addressing a couple of other issues, including cost efficiency, and gets into a little bit more of an expression of what they're doing at the campus level going forward to address some of their financial challenges. And so I'll note that the financial health assessment section of the university evaluations is consistent with and a collaboration of our office in post-secondary finance and capital and consistent with the report that I'm presenting today. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions.
Great. Anyone have questions or comments? And I apologize, probably a number of you can't unmute, but we'll give it a shot. Commissioner Simnett.
I don't have any questions that I think that need to be asked here in this session, but I just did want to say how much I appreciate the level of detail in the report, and including the summary that you provided here for us today, Jim. I know that this is a big, this lays the groundwork for some of the really I think challenging decisions that are going to need to be made in the future by this body, by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, as well as the universities and other across higher education. So I just wanted to say thank you for this and to emphasize the importance of having the weighty detail and then the really helpful summary. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Simnett. And Chair Rowe, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you. Jim, you say, of course, as is appropriate, the colleges and universities are dealing with this on their campuses. Can you give us any idea of what kind of modeling they're doing? That's part one. Part two, is it overly simplistic to assume if federal aid goes way down in whatever form, combined with the pressure on immigrants, undocumented immigrants, then that we could see a sudden drop in enrollment that's reasonably widespread come September? Or is that just way out there? But I guess I'm saying, what do the tea leaves show in terms of what we know so far?
So in response to your first question, I'll share that some of the universities are engaged in long-term 10-year forecasting for finances, forecasting revenues, forecasting spending, and that process that I've seen at Oregon State University. They have a really robust process around that. They started a few years ago. University of Oregon has a process as well where they forecast long-term, revenues and expenses. I think that process by itself is really important as an invitation to the board members and community members, because normally that's done at the board meeting, quarterly board meetings. That process is a really important invitation for all those who want to involve and want to learn about the university's ability going forward to be sustainable, to have those conversations, because I think inevitably it leads to, well, what do we do about it? And that's the important part. So I see a lot of the universities do that in a very formal way. That's not to say the other universities are not doing it. I think they do it in an informal way. So Southern Oregon University, Western Oregon University, sometimes we'll do Eastern. They'll do it through their board meetings, but they'll also do it through, surprisingly enough, their tuition setting process every year, where they engage staff and students through tuition setting, which opens up to a broader conversation about financial sustainability. So I think all of them are focused on it. The expression of it is slightly different by campus. To your second question, I'll say that I really want to punt that question to our financial panelists who are coming up next on the agenda, because I think they'll be better positioned to address some of those issues. We're going to be joined by Jamie Moffitt from University of Oregon, Carson Howell from Southern Oregon University, and hopefully President Bailey from Southern Oregon University as well. And I think Jamie might speak to that exact issue. So I don't want to steal her thunder.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Commissioner Devlin.
Yeah, before we leave this area, I just wanted to highlight the table you have on page 7, where in your composite financial index, it shows 5 out of our 7 institutions struggling, and 3 of the 5 that are struggling at the higher level. I would think that should give someone pause to wonder why this is not a higher priority for the state.
I will, if permitted, Chair Heyman, piggyback on that by saying in the current biennium, the state legislature did appropriate a pot of dollars, $25 million to the higher education, to the HECC, to work with the 5 universities, the TRUs plus PSU, on financial sustainability work. It's called the TRU plus PSU Financial Sustainability. I think we did provide a very limited update to the subcommittee or to the full commission. Maybe it was last meeting, but I think you're 100% right. I think there are concerns about some of the universities and about how do we collaborate with them to make them more sustainable going forward. We're just now getting to the point where with that $25 million, we're funding a number of projects that will be focused over time on improving their financial sustainability. We're hoping to see a lot of good things come of that money. I'm very optimistic about that. We're working on shared administrative services, for example, with the universities. You're going to hear a little bit later as part of the docket item 5.0 during this meeting. My colleague Donna Llewellyn is going to talk about the strategic fund within the CCSF. One of the things the colleges are doing is focusing on shared administrative services and assessing how can we do more of that to bend our cost curve to improve financial sustainability going forward. So I do think there's work being done. I'm always optimistic about additional attention from our state partners on how we can achieve this. But I want to underscore the importance of what you're saying.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks for that question, Commissioner Devlin. I had a comment question that I think piggybacks on that. I want to go, I don't need the page number, but go back to your takeaways. You had 3 of them, and I thought it was nice to be able to summarize down to, specific things. I realize it's not the focus of this report, but I think in order for us to do the work that we have ahead of us, I think, especially in the area of sustainability, I think we need to think more about the change. Market is a bad word for our business, but the nature of the student and the ways in which they pursue education is changing dramatically. And as we think about sustainability, and I think the concerns that Commissioner Devlin raised with those issues for all of our institutions, but certainly 5 of them, we're going to have to look at all those variables, not just it's not just financial, like who we serve, how do we best serve, and what does that mean for us going forward? I think as a state educationally, but certainly as individual institutions, and I'm hoping that can be a more focused effort this year in response to this report, and I think other things as well, to say we do need to be taking. It is a high priority, as Commissioner Devlin has noted, and we need to take a deep and broad look at what can we do to be basically the higher education enterprise that we need for this state. So again, I appreciate that question, and I just want to pursue it further. And I know, again, it's not the focus of this report, but I do think that the world has changed, and that needs to be one of the variables we consider. So, other comments, questions? Anybody who wants to make a comment and can't, or question but can't unmute? Jim, you have anything? I know we're about 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Not too much, but do you have anything to add, or should we be moving on? I have a question from our Guthrie.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just wanted to note that our panelists for 5.0 have joined.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that information. So, Jim, any more questions, or we'll move on to the next item, which is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we are ready to move on. I will, as Guthrie noted, we are joined by our 3 panelists, Jamie Moffitt, who's the Vice President for Finance and Administration, Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration at University of Oregon. We're joined by Dr. Rick Bailey and Dr. Carson Howell from Southern Oregon University. I will say that docket item 4.0 in your materials is, in essence, the list of questions that I provided to them. But I do want to invite them in just to make general comments and to provide what I think is much needed context. I think it's vitally important for our institutional partners to be present and join in this conversation, to hear from them, because they're the experts in these areas on their campuses. So I really am looking forward to this conversation. I'm really appreciative of their time and their ability to join us. And Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to them for added value.
Great, thank you, and welcome. We actually see people, and we're really ready to go forward into this panel discussion. So I don't know how you're organized, but let's proceed. Jim, are you the moderator?
I can be, and we didn't flip a coin. I think I might defer to our invited guests. Perhaps we start with President Bailey and then go from there.
That'd be great.
We cannot hear you, Rick. We've been having problems with people unmuting themselves, so the technology has been giving us challenges. Jamie, can you try to unmute as well so we can do a sound check for you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, terrific. No. Do you want to
No.
flip the order and
Oh,
there you go.
here's now.
Hey, there we go. We can hear you now.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
we were disabled probably on purpose. I think it's probably because I owe Guthrie dinner. Really happy to be with you. Thank you for taking the time to allow us to speak. I'll be really brief. I was a very late add-on. Jamie and Carson are definitely the experts here. I'm more here for color commentary, maybe comic relief. But really honored to be with you. Obviously, these are really, and I'm glad we were able to listen in a little bit before we started the panel. These are really unprecedented times for higher education. Let me just start with a commitment that I made to former Chair Rowe when I first met with the HECC Commission, and that is we're going to do everything that we can as an institution to make sure that we are being good stewards of public financing and do the hard work that we need to do to remain fiscally viable, and also acknowledge that these are pretty challenging times. I'll tell you that in my 3.5-year tenure here at Southern Oregon University, I've had to make the painful decision to eliminate about 13% of our total workforce. Those are never easy decisions, and yet I know that's what we need to do so that we don't continue to put more burden on the backs of students. It is now looking with where the state budget is going to shake out. It's looking like we're going to have to let go of at least another 5% of our workforce. And my PhD is not in mathematics, but I can tell you that I'm pretty sure we can't continue to do that for the next decade. So we have some real challenges ahead of us, and we're doing everything we can to change the fiscal model. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that as we move forward. So with that, I'll maybe turn it over to Jamie and then Carson.
Can folks hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, I thought what I might do to start off is give you a little context for what we're going through on our campus, and then maybe Carson can give a little context with President Bailey for Southern. It is a really challenging time. I would just echo the comments you just heard. I've been with the University of Oregon for 22 years now, and I've been in this role for 13 years. And we've gone through some really hard times. We went through COVID. We went through rounds of budget cuts in prior years. We went through loss of international students. We've gone through massive increases in PERS funding through the years, but I would say that the time we're at now is equally, if not more challenging to anything that we've faced. And there's really just a combination of factors going on. But just to give you a little bit of an input of where we are on our campus, the year that we're ending, fiscal year 25, that's ending in June, we are in a reasonable position for this year. So we, have been tracking finances very carefully. We take these things really seriously. Our board, every quarter, we're meeting with our board. We're running through details of our reports. And we do have enough revenue. We have a balanced budget, more or less, this year for our education and general fund, our E&G fund. So we have enough revenue to cover expenses. But as we project out to next year, that is not the case. And we are looking at a budget gap of somewhere between 25 and 30 million next year. And I can go into all the details of why that's happening. We actually had a multi-hour public discussion about it with our board a couple of weeks ago. But essentially, we're in a situation where our labor costs are just growing, our compensation costs are growing very rapidly. And that has a combination of factors that has to do with some of our labor contracts. It has to do with PERS increases. It has to do with some of our staffing levels. And it's just growing a lot faster than our revenue sources. And so we have had very public conversations with our campus. We have had a town hall earlier this week and multiple communications, and we are going to be going through pretty significant budget cuts this summer because we have to be in a position. We can handle a difference between revenue and expense for a year or two, but we cannot handle a recurring structural issue. And that's what we're facing right now. And so happy to talk more about how we got where we got to, but I wanted to give you some context because I'm guessing if you just ran through the financial sustainability report, you're probably thinking, well, the University of Oregon is in a stronger position than some of the other campuses. And I just want to share with you that we have a number of challenges and are trying to face them head on and make sure that we're addressing them as early as possible. So with that, I'll pass it back to my colleagues from Southern.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. And at Southern, we're in a very similar situation. I think you heard from President Bailey how things are looking. I've actually been with Southern Oregon University for 4 months now. So I can answer all your questions. But I think that it's helpful. President Bailey already gave some context of where Southern Oregon is at, but I think it's also helpful to understand a little bit about kind of nationally where this discussion is. I've worked in 2 different states in their system offices, both at the Utah System of Higher Education and the Idaho Board of Education, and then at a campus there in Utah. And so these discussions that you're having and the situation of higher education and where we're at is not unique to Oregon. These are discussions that are happening at all higher education. A lot of that is driven by changes in the federal government and federal policy. But there's also just a change in kind of the attitudes toward higher education. I think you've all heard about the enrollment cliffs, and we're facing that. We're seeing declining enrollment. One of the questions was about what are we looking at for enrollment, and the assumptions in our budget. We're planning in our budget a 3% decline in enrollment. And so this is happening all over. It really is a unique time in higher education, and those are tough challenges. And as we figure out where are we going as an institution, where are we going as a state, where are we going as partners with the HECC, those are all things that we are trying to figure out, and we're trying to chart a path forward through that.
I think the thing that, and this is kind of a piggyback on something that Jamie said, I think regional, this is going to sound self-serving, so I apologize, Jamie. I think regional universities are kind of the canary in the coal mine. So in the sense that we don't have and by the way, this is not an indictment on anyone who came before Carson and I here, but we don't have a cushion. So for us, we have to make decisions immediately in order to solve the challenge we have. Let me give you a little bit of good news. And this is something I think that Chair Rowe saw when she came to visit the campus. So we're in such interesting times that our own faculty union came to me at a women's basketball game, by the way, and said, hey, Rick, what do you think, because of the challenges we're facing, what do you think of, we were scheduled to go and start bargaining this April, like this 2 months ago. And they actually came up with the idea of postponing it just so we could kind of navigate the current crisis on their initiative. And so even though we went through all of the crises that led to SOU Forward and eliminating 13% of our workforce, all of that stuff, it actually brought us closer together as a team. And so we're starting from a different place than we did 3.5 years ago, in the sense that I think we've built relationships and trust, and I think that's helping. But there is a recognition across the campus that because we don't have a nest egg, because we don't have a strong reserve, we don't have the luxury of waiting it out. So that's why I think we're the canary in that sense, and we just got to make more urgent decisions to navigate the crisis.
Yes, I don't like pushing back, but I'm going to push back just a little alternative perspective. I do think that some of the trends that we've seen in enrollment have shown up in some places in the regional institutions first. So I completely agree with President Bailey on some of the optics, or maybe the idea of a canary in the coal mine. I do think most of us have very little cushion when you think about reserves. And so as an example, A couple of years ago, our campus actually had the fewest weeks of operating expense. When you looked at the E&G fund and you looked at the reserve, but then said, what's the size of the operations? I think we've improved a little bit. So what we're tracking right now is this year we're at something like 8.7 weeks of operating expense. And what I mean by that is if you look at our education and general fund and you say, how many weeks, if you don't have revenue coming in, could you make payroll and could you actually keep operations going in that E&G fund with those funds? We're at about 8.7 weeks. If we don't actually take action next year, we'll drop to 6.4 weeks. And I think Southern is currently lower than we are. I want to acknowledge that because I think I saw in the report that you were even lower at this point. But I just want to push back a little bit at that. I think given the size of our operations, the employees we're responsible for, the costs we have to cover, I don't think there's a campus in Oregon right now that feels comfortable with the size of their reserves and where they are. And so I think one thing we probably should have said earlier is we've come to you, we wanted to make sure you could at least hear directly from one of the larger campuses, one of the true campuses, but the trends and the pressures that we're talking about are across all of our campuses in Oregon. There are budget cuts I know happening at Oregon State. I know they've happened at PSU. I know they've happened at other campuses. So just to the point that was made earlier, this is a trend that we're all, lots of us are facing it right now. And it is very, very challenging.
Amy, totally agree with you. That's not a pushback at all. I totally agree with that and everything you just said.
Thanks. Chair Rowe, you have a question?
Yes, Jamie, to that point, and to phrase it differently than the canary, you have so much experience in Oregon and know very well others' numbers almost as well as you know your own. What I wonder in terms of the whole segment of higher education, is what we're seeing a potentially recurring structural deficit that you said y'all are facing this year, all over, and it's just that those that have been biggest and have the advantage of size are lagging in terms of the most negative effects, but that there's the potential for all of us to end up in the same lousy place? I mean, do you see that strong as similarities between the smaller institutions and the larger ones, I guess?
I guess what I would say is I think we are all facing very significant challenges at the core. And then some of the additional challenges that we have may differ by institution. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by that. What I mean by the core is all of the campuses receive very low levels of state funding per student compared to other states. So we're getting very, very low levels of funding. All of the campuses are mandated to participate in PERS and in PEB, the state programs, which are very, very expensive compared to other states. So when you compare what's going on for our campuses in terms of the funding we're getting from the state and then the cost of benefits, which are very substantial, I think those are putting pressures on all of us in ways that are just simply very, very challenging. Then I think we each have some, and there's more challenges, but I'll highlight some unique challenges. I think some of the smaller campuses, and please jump in, colleagues, if I don't portray this right, might have faced some more enrollment challenges because there are shifts in demographics that might be affecting them either to a larger extent or earlier than the rest of us. But I think some of the larger campuses are now facing real challenges around things like research funding and F&A return that have a bigger portion of our budgets and then start putting more dollars at risk. So it is, I really don't want to understate how challenging of a time it is, because right now, and I can speak again for my campus, we're going through a process where we are going to have to find $25 to $30 million of recurring budget cuts. That is a huge endeavor. We have gone through budget cuts in the past, so I want to be clear. I think all of us have struggled at different times. So for my campus during fiscal year 17, 18, and 19, we went through 3 rounds of budget cuts and layoffs and really tough decisions. So it's not, I think each campus is in a different timing schedule of when they've faced that and when that's happened. But I think all of us have had some real challenges. But I will also share that of the things that could affect us, not all of them have even dropped yet. So for example, some of the things that I think could affect all of us and are going to be very challenging are things like if the federal government does end up reducing the level of support they give for low income students through the Pell Grant. There are proposals to do that. If the federal government limits the amount of borrowing that our students can take out to be able to attend university. If there are changes to the international student situation in terms of whether those students can even get into this country to study here. I think these kinds of things haven't fully hit yet, but could certainly affect each of us to different measures, but will have impacts across all of our campuses. So it is a really challenging time with the level of, I would say, both fiscal challenge and uncertainty that we're all facing.
Great.
Thank you.
Commissioner Devlin.
This question is for Ms. Moffett. I realize both of the institutions represented here that reductions in enrollment could have significant impacts. A reduction at SOU of 100 students probably obviously has far more impacts than 100 students at the U of O. But the U of O has quite a unique mix in the sense you may be 1 or 2 percentage points off this, but a few years ago you were about 50% non-resident and 50% resident. And one of the things that you faced is sometimes your non-resident tuition is at the maximum market rate in the sense of, well, you've increased it in the past, you really can't increase it too much now, or I don't know what the situation is now, because there is a market out there. And if you get too high, you're going to get fewer students. The second part of that is, I'm afraid we're into another scenario where we're going to appear to be very unfriendly to the outside world, to international students. And I don't know how much of your 50% of non-resident are international, but I'm wondering what the people are telling you about the enrollment of non-residents and of international students. You know, I don't know if I don't know how many nations that we have that are on the administration's favored list. It doesn't say much of Europe is on a favored list, and there may be only a few nations out there that are on the administration's favored list left. But I can see a lot of international students and their parents saying this is just not the place to come to.
So I think I got most of that. I apologize. My internet is not very good in my office. So some of that broke up. So if I don't address, first of all, were you done? Because I just want to make sure that I caught everything.
I should give you both one comment. Legislative Fiscal Office, when they look at the dozens and dozens, 100 small regulatory boards that we have, some not so small, that are funded actually by the people they're regulating, they consider them unstable if they have less than 4 months of operating revenue.
Yep.
So, and I don't think any of the 7 have 4 months of operating revenue.
No,
but
that is
what you foresee in terms of non-resident and foreign student enrollment, and what you're hearing.
That is a great question. So I will do my best. And if I don't answer everything you asked, please let me know, because again, I missed a piece of it. So we, each campus is a little bit different in terms of their revenue streams. On our campus, only about 15% of our E&G fund budget actually comes from the state. So we are probably the most tuition dependent of the campuses in Oregon. And for us, because of that tuition dependency, as you noted, a large portion of that funding is coming from non-resident students. And that's because for us, the resident students, once we give them scholarships, even with the funding we get from the state, that doesn't pay for our average cost of education. So essentially, the non-resident students are helping to subsidize us to be able to educate the resident students. That's the model that we have. One of the challenges we do have is international students. Now, I will tell you that years ago, we had a much greater undergraduate international population on our campus. I think we're up close to 3,000 undergraduates. We are now far, far, far below that. Part of the reason we had to do budget cuts in fiscal year 17, 18, and 19 was the PERS increases. But part of the reason was we had this dramatic loss of students from China. And so we faced those dynamics in the past. Doesn't mean they aren't difficult, and certainly the international student situation affects us, but we don't have as many undergraduate international students as we did in the past. We do have a number of graduate students that come from other countries, and they're a robust part of our academic community. And so there are certainly concerns there. One thing I would just share to end this is we do have a large percentage of non-residents. What we're actually seeing most recently is stronger demand on the resident side. And then this past year, we're looking at a lower level of non-residents coming in. And so even though our overall student population looks strong, the mix of students is changing in a way that makes our financial situation extremely challenging, because we're going to be educating more residents, but not as many non-residents as we've had in the past in the entering class. And that is really, really hard. And what we've seen this year, the last couple of years actually, in the marketplace for non-residents is there's absolutely sensitivity to tuition pricing, which is something we've been very attentive to for the last, I'd say, 5 to 7 years. But you also see a lot of schools giving out more and more scholarships and fee remissions. And so it's very challenging because you need to make sure that you stay competitive for those students, because if they're getting wonderful offers from other places, it can be very, very hard to recruit them. So there's a lot of dynamics out there. I have heard a little bit secondhand, but I have heard that some schools that maybe had a lot of international students are now worried about them being able to enter into the country, and therefore might be depending a little bit more on domestic non-resident students than adding to the competition. And the final thing I'll just add as a point, and then again, apologies if I didn't cover everything that you were interested in, but the other issue that sometimes comes at play is what's California doing? Because California is a big state, and for a number of our campuses, a lot of non-resident students come from California. And most recently, at least based on what I've read in the papers, they did admit, I want to say it was something like 39, either 39 or 4,900 extra resident students into the California system. And so that then there are fewer students that are looking to other places for their education. So lots of factors going on, but the point that you've asked about in terms of our dependence on non-resident students is a very important one.
And if I can just hop in for a minute, you know, the mix that Jamie talked about is really important, even for SOU. As we look at the resident students and the additional money that we get from the state, that's really important. When you look at the non-resident students, we're not pulling a lot of non-resident students from Vermont and Massachusetts. We're pulling them from the neighboring states. And at SOU, we participate in the WUI, the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And so those students, rather than paying the full non-resident rate, which is generally 3 times your resident rate, they pay 150% of the resident rate. So even the non-residents that we're pulling in, most of the non-residents are from neighboring states here in the West. And so we don't even receive the full non-resident rate for those students.
And I guess the only thing I'll add on is, and I want to give credit to Ben Cannon for this, because I know that he helped to kind of help put this out there. But, you know, obviously we got sobering news from SHIO, that the organization that does this kind of analysis as we look at where Oregon is compared to other states. And we've kind of slid now 44th to 46th in terms of state support per university student. You heard Jamie talk about that. There is something that we don't talk about a lot, but that we should. And that is that we do, as institutions, we are competing in an interstate marketplace. And so when you look at our neighbors, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, and California, red states and blue states, on average, those states fund public universities to the tune of about $3,000 more per university student, meaning that in those states, it's just harder for us to compete in that marketplace. The other thing I'll point out, and I guess this is in response to an answer to Chair Rowe's question. Jamie talked about PEB and PERS, and I want to kind of put it in perspective. So here at SOU, our share of the Public University Support Fund for the current fiscal year was right around 28 million. And we are grateful for every dime of that. So let me be very clear. But just at SOU, the cost of PEB and PERS alone in the same fiscal year was 16 million. So well more than half of the money that we got from the state had to be invested in two programs that we have no control over. And that's well before we've paid a dime to anyone's salary or turned any lights on or provided any student support or any of that. So unfortunately in Oregon, it just means that students have had to bear more of the burden for the cost of education than our neighboring states. And now, given the challenges of what's happening at the federal level, it just means that Oregon is in more of a precarious position than our neighbors, for what that's worth.
Do you have other questions?
Question.
Yes, Commissioner Yamasaki.
Well, so Jamie, what is the impact in terms of the research dollars that you get from the federal government and your graduate programs? And being able to attract graduate students if your research dollars seem to be going away?
Yeah, I can speak at a high level about both of those. So they're about that issue, and it really, I think it hits us in two different places. So one place we've seen research dollars go away is when the federal government literally terminates a grant or is not going to continue with certain types of research. And we use those dollars to fund the work that happens in the labs. And so that opens up opportunities both for faculty and graduate students to be doing research and to have often their GEs, graduate employees, or GTFs, you might have heard them spoken of, that are doing research in those labs. And if we're not getting those federal dollars and having those opportunities, then there's just less funded research that's available for students as they're thinking about their academic opportunities and their careers. The other place that I want to point out that the federal government has looked to reduce funding for research is on what's called F&A return, which is basically when we have a grant, it's giving us funding to recognize the fact that there are costs to building those labs, to the utilities for those labs, to paying for people who have to file all the data for compliance reasons, for paying for animal care and all those different things. And if that funding is significantly reduced, which has been talked about, you may have heard in the news that there's a proposal originally to reduce that funding level to something like 15%, where for most institutions, those costs run 50% or higher. That would have a significant impact as well on the whole institution, which then puts pressure on budgets for things like graduate programs. So I think there's both a direct impact in terms of actually having opportunities to do cutting edge research in the labs. And then I think there's an indirect program in that they're making the university as a whole more fragile financially, which makes it harder to offer those opportunities. So that kind of hopefully gives you a framework. Obviously, it might vary program by program depending on the specifics of the grants that are in play.
Appreciate that. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Simnett.
Thank you, and thank you to our panelists for coming today and for presenting and giving us some more background. I don't know if I'm guessing this isn't really a question you can answer, but as I'm listening to all of these pressures that the institutions are facing and these decisions that are going to have to be made in the short term and ongoing to address structural issues with the budget, I'm wondering how you maintain the experience for students and support student success for the students who are starting this next year, started 2 years ago, and going forward. So I would love to hear if you have thoughts on that, or can talk a little bit about supporting the students as these changes have to be made in the financial side of things.
Yeah, I can start with that, and because it's a great question, and I will tell you it's the thing, and because of your background and your position, I know you think about this every day too. I think that is the central core issue that we're dealing with every day, right? How do we make sure that we are still continuing to keep our eye on the ball. And that is really about how we take care of and put students on a pathway to their own educational goals. It's harder, I will tell you that. And so as we start to make these impossible decisions about where we are looking at programmatic changes, I think the students are pretty savvy. I mean, they understand where we're at. They understand why we're doing it. That's why students are flooding to Salem to make those pitches as well to state legislators. They're very keenly aware of what's happening in DC and keeping an eye on that. I will tell you at SOU, and I'm sure this is the same at U of O, they are so in tune with what's going on that we can see it reflected in numbers. So when the FAFSA debacle happened a year and a half ago, that was a real impact for us. We've had prospective students who've said, hey, the U.S. Department of Education is going away. There's not even going to be Pell Grant available. Why am I even applying to college? Like, we're getting that kind of, so we're trying to double down at least at the moment and saying, look, these opportunities are still available. There's still a pathway for you. But it is exceedingly difficult to do that. I always say we're unique as a state institution because we have to convince the people we serve to accept the services we provide, right? We have to sell it in a lot of ways, and so that's difficult. I will say this, and I don't think this makes it any better, but I think all 7 of our universities and all 17 of our community colleges, by the way, I think we are all laser focused on what do we have to do so that we don't let go of why we're here, and I think we'll keep that as the core of our focus.
Yeah, and I would add to that just a perspective from our campus. So since our new president arrived 2 years ago, we've been going through pretty intensive strategic planning and focusing on key priorities for our campus. And that planning has evolved around kind of 4 really key strategic priorities. The first one is around removing impediments to timely graduation, so helping students to graduate sooner and be successful while they're here. Our second main goal has to do with helping them transition to the world of work. So how do we set them up for the best success to get careers and to transition? The third has to do with our whole community in terms of flourishing and trying to support people and their well-being and their careers and their time at the university. And then we have some areas of research excellence that we're focusing on as well. And it's interesting because when we first talked about budget cuts, a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, how are we ever going to achieve our goals? Because we now are cutting when we want to be investing. And that is definitely a huge issue. But as we've talked about it, we feel like it's more important than ever to have priorities and goals if we're going through budget cutting so that we can assess as we're making these choices how they impact the strategic priorities of the institution and trying to impact those priorities around timely graduation, transition to careers, flourishing, and then areas of excellence as little as possible. But the reality is there will be impacts to our campus because we have people that are working really hard today and we're not going to have as many positions going forward. And so we've just also tried to accept the fact that there will be impacts, and we're going to try to do everything we can to minimize the impact on the institution, its mission, and the community as a whole. But it's really hard. It is really, really hard.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. Those were responses. Very thoughtful. Anything else for this panel? Yes, President Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Before we head out, the last time I met with all of the commissioners, one of the things I mentioned is, and I'm going to give a shout out to our friends at U of O here. We said we needed to think differently about our fiscal model. So it's not just about, hey, state of Oregon, you need to help us. By the way, I want to make that message very clear. But it's also, we know that we have work to do on our own, right? What are the things that we need to do to change the fiscal model? And so we actually started looking at our friends in Eugene and Corvallis and said, how do we start acting a little more entrepreneurial like they do? And we can do that even as a smaller institution. So an update for all of you. One of the things we talked about is we're opening an older adult living community on our campus, a public-private partnership where we're actually going to be sharing revenue with them. We have national bidders now. We're going through the summer and identifying that. And so we're actually going to have a brand new revenue stream that we haven't had in 153 years. So we're not just relying on state dollars and tuition. We're doing those things. the day I showed up, we were making 3% of our own electricity on campus. Today, we're making 11.6%. So we're doing the transformative things that we need to do as an institution to change the fiscal model, but that does take time. So I didn't want you to, I didn't want us to leave this session without you knowing that we're still fully committed to doing those things to change our model.
Yeah, really appreciate that. Well, I want to thank you. This has been, well, it takes our conversation and brings it home to our institution and to our students. And you've done a masterful job of helping us to connect with that. And I greatly appreciate the time that you've spent with us to sort of flesh out this challenging time for us. So thank you, and greatly appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Guthrie, is Donna available?
I believe Director Llewellyn is online.
Hello, good afternoon, Vice Chair Heyman and members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Donna Llewellyn. I'm the Director of your Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. I'm here today to bring for your consideration the Community College Strategic Fund amount. I'll start with a little bit of background, history, and context for you. The Strategic Fund is created each biennium by setting aside a percentage of the Community College Support Fund prior to allocating funds through the distribution formula. It has two main purposes: incentivizing statewide initiatives or activities, or assisting community colleges in meeting new requirements and expectations stemming from legislative change. Any unused monies remaining in the current biennium strategic fund are allocated through the distribution formula at the end of the biennium. As a portion of the Community College Support Fund, all of these investments must go to Oregon community colleges. The Strategic Fund was established in the 2005-07 biennium, and it was started with a 0.25% allocation. Over the years, it's been adjusted as high as 1.5% in the 2015-17 biennium, and in 17-19, the amount was reduced to 0.75% and has remained at that percentage level since. Historically, the fund has invested most heavily in student success initiatives, including things like career pathways, developmental education redesign, and improving the first-year experience. Investments have also been made in research and data quality. For the 2023-25 biennium, the strategic fund allocation was approximately $5.9 million. The table in your packet shows the investments made and how each of those investments are aligned with the Commission's previously identified strategic action areas. Your packet also includes an overview of the biennial cycle, which is meant to provide transparency around the planning and use of the strategic fund. The review of the proposals for funding is a robust one. They are reviewed in partnership with the Oregon President's Council and in accordance with Oregon Oregon Administrative Rule 589-002-0130, which includes a review of things like how the investments support the initiatives and work plans of CCWD and HECC, how it supports our key performance measures, and the need for continued investment and sustainability plans. The excerpt of the Oregon Administrative Rule is also included in your packet. So now we reach the point to talk about the recommendations for the 25-27 biennium. After extensive conversations with the Oregon President's Council spanning over several months, which included points for consideration such as recognizing that we are awaiting the completion of a community college shared services study, which was also strategically supported by this year's fund. And it may identify additional areas for leveraging state investments. The Oregon President's Council has recommended funding this biennium's strategic fund at 1% of the Community College Support Fund for this biennium. To highlight some of the areas that have been identified for investment for this biennium, those include continuation of investments for continued improvement in student supports, as well as shared services. Additional information regarding these investments will be shared with you in the fall. The final table that's listed in your packet identifies potential values of the strategic fund based upon the current amount of 0.75% and the recommended amount of 1%. And with that, I am open to answer any questions you may have.
Do we have questions for Donna? I have a quick comment. You're mentioning a date on which we created the strategic fund. Reminds me how old I am, because I was there when we did that. And
Me too.
Yeah, we're both in different roles.
Yes, we were.
Yes. I would want to add a comment that I think we recognized back then, and it was a hard conversation, that there were some things that were better funded collaboratively than individually. And that was a long conversation, but I think over the years it has proven to be true. And I think we've seen some great work come out of this type of sort of collaborative contribution to a collective fund to do things that benefit all of the institutions. And I'm glad to see that the community college presidents continue to support that and have even recommended that we increase that amount by a bit. So I appreciate your work on this, your recommendation, and if there are no other comments or questions, I would, this is an action item. No, it's an action item tomorrow. So, but we are to recommend to the full commission. So perhaps could entertain a motion that we would recommend to approve this to the full commission tomorrow.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move to recommend approval to the full Commission of Community College Support Fund, Strategic Fund investment at 1% for the 25-27 biennium.
Thank you, Commissioner Devlin.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Simnett. All who are in favor of that recommendation, please indicate by raising your hand, I guess. And if you are not in approval, please find a way of letting me know that. I think that that is approved then. So Donna, we will forward that to the full commission tomorrow with our recommendation to approve.
Thank you.
And thank you for your work on that. Are there any further items before we adjourn this meeting? Again, I want to thank Commissioner Yamasaki for becoming a member of this. I think you will add a lot of good conversation to our work, so I appreciate your willingness to do this. Guthrie, did I see you attempting to?
Just to indicate there are no further items, Mr. Chair.
There are. Then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'll move to adjourn.
Thanks, Commissioner Yamasaki.
Second.
Thanks, Chair Rowe. All in favor? Aye, raise your hand or say something.
Something.
Thanks all of you, and I hope to see all of you tomorrow. We are adjourned.
Bye. Take care.